That morning, no one expected a single act of defiance to change military history. What began as routine training became a moment every soldier on base would remember, and one that would test the difference between following orders and doing what's right. The sun crested the horizon over Fort Bragg, casting long shadows across the dew-slicked parade ground. The air carried the sharp tang of wet earth and diesel from idling Humvees on the perimeter. At precisely 0600 hours, the platoon assembled in formation, boots thudding in unison against the packed gravel. Sergeant First Class Elena Vasquez stood at the front, her uniform pressed to crisp edges, the brass on her collar glinting under the early light. She was the handler for K9 Unit Delta, a role that demanded not just skill, but an unspoken pact with the animal at her side. Rex, her German Shepherd partner, sat rigidly beside her, his black and tan coat still damp from the night's humidity. At 7 years old, he moved with a subtle hitch in his left rear leg, a remnant of shrapnel from a deployment 3 years prior. The limp was barely noticeable to the untrained eye, but it marked him as a veteran, one who had earned his place through missions that left lesser dogs broken. Vasquez placed a gloved hand on his head, feeling the warmth of his fur and the steady rhythm of his breathing. In the world of military working dogs, loyalty wasn't voiced. It was forged in silence, in the shared weight of rucksacks and the trust that came from countless patrols. "Platoon, attention!" The command echoed from Captain Harlan Reed, the company commander, his voice cutting through the low murmur of the ranks. Reed was a tall man, his frame honed by 20 years in special forces, his eyes scanning the formation like a hawk assessing prey. The recruits, fresh from basic, their faces a mix of eagerness and uncertainty, snapped to position, chins up, shoulders back. Among them was Private Daniel Hargrove, 22, with the lean build of someone who had traded civilian life for the structure of the army. His father had been a sergeant in the 82nd Airborne, killed in action during a raid in Afghanistan a decade ago. Hargrove wore that legacy like an invisible insignia, a chip on his shoulder that made him quick to prove himself. The morning's drill was standard, obedience exercises for the K9 teams, integrated with platoon maneuvers to build cohesion. Vasquez led Rex through the basics first: heel, sit, down. Her commands low and firm, delivered in the clipped tone that Rex responded to without hesitation. The dog's ears perked at her voice, his dark eyes fixed forward, ignoring the sidelong glances from the recruits. "K9 integration reinforces unit discipline," Reed announced over the PA system, his words amplified by the faint crackle of static. "These animals detect threats you can't see. Respect the bond, or you'll learn the hard way." As the platoon broke into smaller groups for paired exercises, Hargrove found himself assigned to shadow Vasquez's team. He approached with measured steps, his boots scuffing the gravel, trying to mask the flicker of resentment in his eyes. He'd heard the stories about K9 handlers, how they treated their dogs like family, sometimes more than the soldiers around them. To Hargrove, it felt like favoritism, a softness in a system built on iron rules. Rex limped slightly as he demonstrated a scent track, circling a mock explosive cache hidden in the underbrush. The dog's nose worked methodically, nostrils flaring until he alerted with a sharp sit and paw raise. Hargrove watched, arms crossed, then let out a low chuckle that carried farther than he intended. "That dog's got more miles on him than my old man's truck. What's he compensating for with that hitch? Too many close calls." The words hung in the air, drawing a few stifled snickers from nearby recruits. Vasquez's hand tightened on Rex's leash, but she kept her face neutral, her gaze locking onto Hargrove's. The private's smirk faded under her stare, but he shrugged it off, attributing it to the handler's protectiveness. "Private Hargrove," Vasquez said evenly, her voice carrying the weight of command, without rising in pitch. "Rex has served 3 tours. That limp? It's from a mission in Helmand Province. IED blast. He got his handler out alive." She didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The implication was clear. Mockery had no place in a formation where lives depended on trust. Hargrove's jaw set, a flush creeping up his neck, but he nodded curtly and fell into step beside them for the next drill. The exercise continued under the relentless sun, now climbing higher, baking the ground until heat shimmered off the asphalt paths. Radio chatter filled the intervals. "Team Alpha, clear the sector," punctuated by the distant thump of helicopter rotors from the airfield. Vasquez guided Rex through an obstacle course, the dog navigating low crawls and jumps with determined grace, his limp evident only on the uneven terrain. Hargrove trailed, carrying the team's gear bag, his earlier bravado replaced by a brooding silence. He glanced at Rex occasionally, noting the way the dog deferred to Vasquez's subtle cues, a tilt of the head, a soft whistle, without a word spoken. By Aero 900, the platoon regrouped for debrief. Reed paced the front, clipboard in hand, reviewing performance logs. "Solid work overall. Vasquez, your team's detection rate was 98%. Hargrove, integrate tighter next time. Distractions cost focus." The captain's eyes lingered on the private, sensing the undercurrent but attributing it to rookie nerves. As the formation dismissed, soldiers dispersed toward the mess hall, the scent of coffee and MREs wafting from the tents. Vasquez knelt to check Rex's paws for abrasions, her fingers gentle against the pads. The dog leaned into her touch, a quiet affirmation of their bond. Hargrove lingered at the edge of the group, watching the exchange. Something stirred in him, a vague unease like the first twinge of a blister from ill-fitted boots. He joined to honor his father, to prove he could endure what the old man hadn't, but mocking a dog that had faced fire. It felt off, a crack in the discipline he'd sworn to uphold. As he slung his pack over his shoulder and headed back to barracks, the base's routine hummed on, guards changing at the gate, the low growl of generators, the faint echo of boots on concrete. That afternoon, during downtime in the handler's kennel, a concrete bunker lined with chain-link runs and the earthy smell of straw, Vasquez reviewed Rex's medical logs. The vet had cleared him for light duty, but the limp persisted, a daily reminder of the cost. She scratched behind his ears, murmuring, "Good boy, we keep going." Unbeknownst to her, Hargrove had been assigned cleanup detail nearby, and as he hosed down the runs, he overheard snippets from another handler, tales of Rex's last deployment, how the dog had pushed through the blast zone, dragging his injured partner to safety while the squad covered their retreat. The private paused, water spraying in a steady arc, the cold mist cooling his skin. His father's mission reports, declassified after the fact, flickered in his mind. Ambush in a dusty village, no extraction in time. Rex had survived something similar, something his dad hadn't. The realization settled like dust after a convoy, heavy and unavoidable. But pride kept him silent, the chain of command demanding he bury it for now. As evening fell, the base lights flickered on, casting pools of yellow across the grounds. Vasquez walked Rex on a final patrol, the dog's limp softened by the cooler air. Hargrove, from his bunk window, watched them go, the weight of unspoken words pressing against the rigid lines of military life. The defiance was brewing, not yet ignited, but the spark had landed in dry grass. The next day dawned with the familiar grind of reveille. A shrill bugle cutting through the pre-dawn haze over Fort Bragg. Fog clung to the low-lying fields, muting the outlines of the barracks and training fields, while the scent of damp pine from the surrounding woods seeped into the air. Private Daniel Hargrove rose with the platoon, his bunk creaking under the swift motion, the coarse wool blanket folding neatly as per regulations. Sleep had been fitful, haunted by fragments of old letters from his father, yellowed pages describing patrols in hostile terrain, the unspoken risks that ended in a single, final report. He shook it off, splashing cold water on his face from the communal sink, the metallic tang of the faucet grounding him in the present. By Aero 5:30, the platoon mustered in the armory for equipment check, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like distant rotors. Rifles clicked into racks, magazines inspected with gloved hands, the oiled metal gleaming under scrutiny. Captain Reed oversaw the process, his clipboard a constant companion, noting discrepancies in a voice steady as a metronome. Precision in prep means precision in the field, he reminded them, his gaze sweeping the line. Hargrove stood at attention, his M4 carbine balanced just so, but his mind wandered to the kennels beyond the fence. Rex's limp replayed in his thoughts. Not as a punchline now, but as a marker of endurance he couldn't dismiss. The morning's schedule shifted to joint operations training. K9 teams, paired with infantry squads, for simulated urban clearance. Vasquez and Rex arrived at the mock village site, a cluster of plywood structures mimicking Afghan compounds, chain-link fences scarred by previous drills. The air hummed with activity, generators whirring to life, the sharp crack of blank rounds echoing from adjacent ranges. Vasquez adjusted Rex's harness, the leather straps worn but secure, her movements efficient, born of years syncing human and canine rhythms. "Easy, boy," she murmured, her breath visible in the chill. Rex's tail gave a single wag, his eyes alert to the shifting shadows. Hargrove's squad drew assignment to Vasquez's team, a deliberate rotation to foster integration. He fell in behind the handler as they approached the first building, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth bordering the site. The private's earlier words lingered unspoken between them, a tension as taut as a tripwire. Vasquez didn't acknowledge it directly. Protocol demanded focus on the task. "We'll clear room by room," she briefed the group, her voice projecting clearly over the low chatter of radios. "Rex leads on scent, you cover angles. No assumptions." The recruits nodded, weapons at low ready, the weight of their gear a familiar anchor. As they breached the first structure, the door creaking on rusty hinges, Rex moved ahead with purposeful strides, his nose sampling the air. The interior smelled of sawdust and faint mildew, corners cluttered with prop debris to simulate clutter. The dog's limp showed on the uneven flooring, a brief hesitation before he pressed on, alerting to a hidden device under a table with a low bark. Hargrove swept his sector, flashlight beam cutting through dust motes, but his attention snagged on Rex. The animal's determination, pushing through discomfort without complaint, mirrored stories his father had told of wounded comrades refusing medevac to hold the line. Midway through the exercise, a complication arose. During a secondary sweep, one of the structure's supports gave way under simulated stress, a controlled failure to test adaptability. Boards shifted with a groan, sending a section of wall leaning precariously. Rex, already inside scouting, froze at the sound, his ears flattening. Vasquez called out, "Rex, out!" But the dog held position, sensing instability. Hargrove, closest to the entry, reacted on instinct, lunging forward to secure the leaning panel. "Handler, cover!" he shouted, his voice edged with urgency, as he wedged his rifle stock against the frame to brace it. Vasquez pulled Rex back by the collar, the dog's nails scraping the plywood as they retreated. The momentary chaos drew Sergeant Reed's attention from the observation post, his radio crackling to life. "Squad 3, report, structural breach." Hargrove held the brace until the team cleared, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool air, his arms straining against the wood. When they regrouped outside, Vasquez checked Rex over, her hands methodical on his flanks. "Good hold," she said to the dog, then turned to Hargrove. "That was quick thinking, Private. Could have pinned him." He straightened, wiping grit from his hands, the adrenaline fading into a quiet satisfaction. "Just following procedure, Sergeant. Can't let the team down." But beneath the words, a shift stirred. Protecting Rex hadn't felt like duty alone. It echoed the loyalty his father had demanded from his own unit, the kind that transcended ranks. The private glanced away, toward the horizon, where the sun burned through the fog, casting the base in stark relief. Debrief followed under the pavilion, folding chairs scraping on concrete as the platoon sat. Reed reviewed footage from body cams, the screen flickering with grainy playback. Hargrove's brace bought critical seconds. Vasquez, your dog's alert prevented a full collapse simulation. Nods rippled through the group, but Hargrove felt the weight of eyes on him, curiosity from the recruits who'd heard his jab the day before. He kept his expression neutral, hands clasped in his lap, the faint scent of gun oil clinging to his uniform. Lunch in the mess hall brought a brief respite, trays clattering on long tables, the steam from chow lines carrying aromas of stewed beef and fresh bread. Hargrove sat with his squad, picking at his meal, when a veteran handler from another unit slid in nearby. Conversation turned to war stories, as it often did. Careful recitals of deployments, avoiding the classified. "Rex there," the handler said, nodding toward Vasquez across the room as she fed her partner from a bowl. "Pulled off a miracle in Helmand. IED went off mid-patrol. Handler took shrapnel to the leg, same side as the dog's now. Rex dragged him 200 meters under fire, limping the whole way. Medevac couldn't get in closer." Hargrove's fork paused halfway to his mouth, the words landing like incoming rounds. 200 meters. His father's after-action report had detailed a similar ambush. No cover. Extraction delayed by enemy fire. The sergeant hadn't made it. Rex had. The private pushed his tray aside, appetite gone, the din of the hall fading to a murmur. He watched Vasquez ruffle Rex's ears, the dog's head tilting into her hand, a bond unbroken by scars. Afternoon brought weapons maintenance in the shed, the air thick with solvent and metal polish. Hargrove disassembled his rifle methodically, cloth moving in rhythmic strokes, but his thoughts churned. Mocking the limp now seemed not just foolish, but a betrayal of the very code he'd enlisted to uphold. His father's letters spoke of trust in the team, human or otherwise, as the thin line between survival and the grave. Yet admitting fault meant facing scrutiny. A chink in the armor of a recruit, still proving his mettle. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in muted oranges, the platoon conducted evening PT, a 5-mile run along the perimeter trail, boots pounding in cadence. "Left, left, left, right, left," the squad leader called, voices joining in disciplined rhythm. Hargrove kept pace, the burn in his legs a welcome distraction. Rex's image flashing with each stride, the dog's unyielding gait despite the hitch. Vasquez ran with the K9 group ahead, Rex trotting beside her, his breath steady. Cool-down stretches followed on the dew-kissed grass, muscles cooling under the twilight breeze. Hargrove lingered, catching Vasquez as she watered Rex from a canteen. "Sergeant," he started, voice low, "about yesterday." The comment. It was out of line. She met his eyes, her nod brief but accepting. "We all learn, Private. Just remember, that limp's a badge, like the ones we carry inside." He saluted, sharper than required, and turned toward barracks. The base settled into night routine. Lights dimming in windows, the distant bark of other K9s echoing like sentinels. In his bunk, Hargrove lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams, the weight of legacy pressing down. The spark from the morning's mockery had ignited something deeper, a question of where loyalty ended and conscience began. Tomorrow's drills would test it further. The chain of command watching every step. The bugle for reveille pierced the pre-dawn quiet at 0500, pulling Private Daniel Hargrove from a shallow sleep. The barracks air hung heavy with the scent of polished boots and faint sweat from the previous day's exertions, the wooden bunks creaking as the platoon stirred. Hargrove swung his legs over the edge, feet meeting the cold linoleum, and began the ritual, making his rack with hospital corners, uniform donned with creases aligned to regulation. His apology to Sergeant Vasquez the night before lingered like a half-formed order, unresolved in the rigid cadence of base life. He hadn't expected absolution, just the chance to realign, yet the words felt insufficient against the dog's silent endurance. By 0600, the formation assembled on the dew-dampened quad, the platoon snapping to attention under Captain Reed's watchful eye. The sky was a slate grey, promising another day of drills, laced with the earthy bite of pine from the Carolina woods. Reed's voice carried crisp over the ranks. Today's focus: endurance runs with K9 integration. Handlers maintain leash discipline. Infantry shadow without interference. Vasquez stood at the flank with Rex, the German shepherd's harness clipped secure, his coat bristling slightly in the chill. The limp was there, a subtle drag on the left hind, but Rex held his sit with unwavering poise, eyes forward as if reading the unspoken commands in the air. Hargrove fell into line with his squad, rifle slung across his back, the weight a steady reminder of duty's demands. As the group set out along the perimeter trail, a winding path of packed dirt and gravel bordering the wire fences, the rhythm built, boots thudding in sync, breaths measured against the rising mist. Vasquez led the K9 contingent at a controlled trot, Rex matching her stride, his paws padding softly despite the uneven ground. Hargrove, assigned to the rear for observation, watched the handler's subtle cues, a loose rein here, a verbal steady there. The dog's focus never wavered, nose twitching at phantom scents carried on the breeze. Halfway through the 3-mile loop, the trail narrowed into a single-file stretch, flanked by dense underbrush, the air thickening with the loamy scent of fallen leaves. Private Ellis, a wiry recruit from Hargrove's squad with a penchant for cutting corners, lagged behind, his pack straps slipping. As they passed a cluster of handlers, Ellis muttered under his breath, loud enough for the line to catch, "Look at that gimpy mutt keeping up. Bet he slows the whole team down, kind of like dead weight in the field." A few chuckles rippled back, low and conspiratorial, the kind that tested the edges of unit cohesion without fully breaching it. Hargrove's jaw tightened, the words hitting like shrapnel from his own earlier misstep. He glanced ahead to Rex, the dog navigating a root-strewn section with determined pulls, Vasquez's hand steady on the lead. The private's pulse quickened, not from the run, but from the surge of something raw, defensiveness perhaps, or the echo of his father's tales of squads fracturing over petty barbs. "Stow it, Ellis," Hargrove said, his voice pitched just above the cadence, firm but not shouting. The recruit shot him a sidelong glare, wiping sweat from his brow. "What, you the dog's lawyer now? Lighten up, Hargrove. It's just talk." The exchange drew Sergeant Vasquez's ear from the front. She half-turned, her expression unreadable in the dim light filtering through the trees. But she said nothing, pressing on with Rex, the dog's ears flicking back briefly at the raised voices. Reed, monitoring from a jeep at the trailhead via radio, keyed in. "Squad leads, report any disruptions. Focus holds the line." The captain's tone brooked no debate, a reminder that whispers could escalate to infractions under the chain of command. The run concluded at the training pavilion, chests heaving as the platoon circled up for water breaks. Plastic canteens sloshed, the cool liquid cutting through the burn in Hargrove's throat. Rex panted steadily beside Vasquez, accepting a bowl from her gloved hands, his tongue lapping methodically. Ellis, still flushed, cornered Hargrove near the benches, the wood slick with morning condensation. "You gonna rat me out for that? Thought you were one of us, not babysitting strays." The recruit's eyes narrowed, the challenge hanging like humidity before a storm. Hargrove met his gaze, hands on his knees as he caught his breath, the faint ache in his calves, mirroring the tension coiling in his gut. "It's not about ratting. That dog's pulled more weight than you'll know in your first tour. Mock it, and you're mocking the mission." His words came measured, echoing the restraint Vasquez had shown him, but Ellis scoffed. turning to a couple of nearby privates for backup. Hear that? Hargrove's gone soft over a limping hound. Next he'll be saluting the chow line. The murmurs grew, drawing a wider circle, 5, then 7 recruits pausing mid-conversation, the pavilion's metal roof amplifying the low buzz. Vasquez, overhearing as she checked Rex's paws for thorns, straightened slowly, her boots scraping the gravel. "Private Ellis," she interjected, voice level as a rifle sight. "Care to repeat that in formation? K9 units aren't optional gear. They're the edge you lean on when scents turn lethal." The handler's eyes held no anger, only the quiet authority of experience, Rex sitting alert at her side, sensing the shift without a growl. Reed arrived then, jeep engine ticking as it cooled, his presence silencing the group like a dropped magazine. "What's the holdup? Debrief in 5. But his scan caught the undercurrent, the clustered postures speaking volumes. He pulled Ellis and Hargrove aside under the pavilion's overhang, the air cooling as clouds gathered overhead. "I heard enough on the wire. Disrespect to assets, human or canine, undermines the unit. Ellis, extra duty scrubbing kennels tonight. Hargrove, you intervened. Log it as positive." The captain's nod was brief, a commendation wrapped in procedure. But it landed heavy on Hargrove's shoulders. As the platoon dispersed toward the armory for morning quals, the sky opened with a light drizzle, pattering on helmets and turning the paths to mud. Hargrove walked with Vasquez's team unbidden, the handler not objecting. "Appreciate the backup, Private," she said quietly over the soft patter. "Rex doesn't need defending, but the principal does." He nodded, watching the dog shake off the rain, his coat darkening, the limp barely registering on the smoother concrete. The act of speaking up had cracked something open, a test of his own conscience against the pull of peer loyalty, the chain demanding he choose. Lunch in the mess hall passed in subdued tones, trays scraping as steam rose from vats of chili and cornbread, the aroma cutting through the damp uniforms. Hargrove sat alone at first, then joined a table of handlers, their talk turning to protocol. Leash recalls in adverse weather, the subtle cues that bound man and dog. Ellis avoided him, head down over his meal, the incident simmering like unresolved static on a radio. Afternoon brought live-fire exercises on the range, the sharp cracks of rounds echoing across the fields, brass casings warm underfoot. Hargrove qualified clean, his shots grouping tight, but his mind replayed the pavilion standoff, the line he'd drawn, however small. Evening PT shifted to the obstacle course, floodlights casting long shadows as the platoon tackled walls and ropes, the air crisp with exertion and wet earth. Rex demonstrated a low crawl for the K9 demo, belly to the ground, emerging with mud-caked fur but tail steady. Hargrove volunteered to spot, his hands guiding a recruit over a beam, the earlier defiance echoing in his resolve. As night fell, the base hummed with generators and distant chatter, Hargrove in his bunk, reflecting on the day's ripples. A single rebuke, witnesses aplenty, the institution's gears turning toward accountability. The moral weight settled, not as burden, but catalyst. Hargrove's stand a quiet violation of the recruit code, testing obedience against the deeper call of respect. Tomorrow would bring scrutiny, perhaps a formal log, but for now, the silence of the barracks held the promise of growth forged in discipline. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories of courage and integrity can reach. The first light of dawn filtered through the narrow windows of the barracks, painting faint stripes across the rows of bunks at Fort Bragg. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint metallic scent of dew on the quad outside, mingled with the ever-present undertone of boot polish and canvas. Private Daniel Hargrove lay awake, his body rigid under the thin blanket, the events of the previous day replaying in measured loops, like a tactical debrief. His intervention at the pavilion had earned a nod from Captain Reed, but it also marked him. Whispers among the recruits, turning him from peer to outlier, the one who'd chosen a dog's honor over squad banter, Sleep had evaded him, replaced by the quiet churn of conscience. Was defending Rex obedience, or the first step toward questioning the chain? Reveille sounded at 0500 sharp, the bugle's trill slicing the silence, followed by the immediate shuffle of feet hitting the floor. Hargrove rose with the platoon, folding his bedding with precise creases, the coarse fabric snapping under his hands. In the communal latrine, water rushed from faucets as faces were scrubbed, the cold splash a jolt that sharpened focus. Uniforms were donned in ritual silence, fatigues tucked, boots laced tight, the platoon emerging as a cohesive unit, ranks aligned under the graying sky. Captain Reed waited at the formation point, his silhouette crisp against the horizon, clipboard tucked under his arm. Morning brief, weapons quals and K9 interoperability, no deviations, discipline starts here. Vasquez and Rex joined the flank as the group marched to the range, the dog's paws clicking softly on the asphalt path, his limp a subtle rhythm amid the thud of boots. Hargrove took his position in the line, rifle at sling arms, the weight grounding him. The range sprawled under open sky, berms of packed earth rising like silent guardians, the air sharp with the tang of cordite from overnight sessions. Targets popped up at intervals along the firing line, paper silhouettes marked with vital zones, fluttering faintly in the breeze. Instructors barked commands over the PA, "Load and make ready." Bolts slid home with metallic clacks, magazines seating firm. Hargrove qualified first in his rotation, his shots steady, 3 rounds center mass, the recoil a familiar thump against his shoulder. But as the platoon rotated to the K9 demo section, tension coiled anew. Ellis, assigned to the same subgroup, shot Hargrove a sidelong glare during the safety brief, his jaw set like a locked breech. The exercise called for infantry to simulate cover, while Rex performed detection sweeps, the dog weaving through mock debris piles under Vasquez's guidance. "Eyes on your sectors," she instructed, her voice cutting clean over the wind. "Rex alerts, you respond. No chatter." As Rex began his track, nose low to the ground, nostrils flaring at concealed scents, Ellis positioned himself behind a sandbag barrier, weapon at low ready. The dog's path brought him close, the limp evident as he navigated the uneven sand, but his focus held laser-sharp. Midway, Ellis shifted his stance deliberately, his boot extending just enough to clip Rex's flank, an accidental nudge masked as adjustment. The dog stumbled briefly, a low whine escaping before he recovered, alerting successfully to the hidden prop with a paw raise. Vasquez's eyes narrowed, but she called the clear without pause, leash taut in her gloved hand. Hargrove, covering the left angle, caught the move from the corner of his eye. Adrenaline surged, hot and immediate, his grip tightening on the rifle. "Ellis, watch your footing," he said through gritted teeth, voice pitched for the team but laced with warning. The recruit straightened, feigning innocence, but his smirk betrayed him. "Slipped on the sand, Hargrove. Dog's tough, should handle it." The words drew a couple of nods from nearby privates, the undercurrent of resentment bubbling up like radio static. Vasquez pulled Rex back for a reset, her hand running along his side in a subtle check, the dog's ears perked but body tense. The incident rippled outward during the rotation break, water bottles passed hand to hand under the range awning, the plastic crinkling amid low murmurs. A cluster of recruits formed near the ammo crates, Ellis at the center, his voice carrying just enough. "That mutt's a liability. One bad step, and he's down for good. Hargrove thinks he's some hero for sticking up for it, probably jealous he can't run without whining." Laughter followed, stifled but pointed, heads turning as Vasquez led Rex to the shade for a breather. The handler's posture stiffened, but protocol held her tongue. Witnesses were mounting, the air thickening with unspoken challenge. Captain Reed, observing from the control tower, keyed his radio mid-debrief. "Vasquez, report to CP after this. Potential interference logged." His tone was neutral, procedural, but the summons hung heavy. Hargrove felt it too, the weight of eyes on him as the platoon reformed for the final sweeps. When Rex took the field again, the dog moved with undiminished purpose, but Hargrove's sector felt narrower. Every shadow a potential fracture. Ellis complied outwardly, but the nudge had escalated the test, from words to action, pulling Hargrove deeper into the fray. Post-range, the platoon marched back under a climbing sun, sweat beading on brows, the scent of gunpowder clinging to fatigues. In the armory, rifles were cleared and racked with ritual care, bolts cycling empty chambers. Hargrove lingered, wiping down his weapon with a cloth damp from solvent, the sharp chemical smell clearing his head. Ellis brushed past on his way out, shoulder bumping deliberately. "Keep playing night, Private. See how far that gets you in the real world." The words landed low, a gauntlet thrown in the dim light of hanging bulbs. Vasquez caught Hargrove at the door, Rex sitting patiently at her heel. "Saw what happened out there?" she said quietly, her gaze steady. "Appreciate you calling it, but log it formal. Don't let it fester." He nodded, the advice settling like a well-aimed round. "Won't, Sergeant. That dog's earned better." The handler's brief smile was the closest to approval, gone as she turned toward the command post, Rex's limp fading into the distance. Afternoon brought administrative duties in the company office, the air-conditioned hum a stark contrast to the range's exposure, files shuffling under fluorescent glare. Reed summoned Hargrove and Ellis separately, the captain's desk a barrier of polished oak and stacked reports. "Private Hargrove," Reed began, eyes fixed. "Witness statements confirm interference. Your intervention noted positively, but escalation risks unit integrity. File the report." Hargrove stood at attention, voice even. "Yes, sir, just protecting the team." Ellis, in turn, received a stern warning, his denial met with the weight of evidence, body cam footage catching the boot's arc. Word spread through the barracks by evening chow, trays clattering in the mess hall. The steam from mashed potatoes and gravy carrying a comforting normalcy. Recruits exchanged glances over meals, the incident evolving from gossip to legend in hushed tones. Hargrove ate methodically, the food tasteless against the knot in his stomach, his father's voice echoing from old recordings. "Stand for what's right, son, even if it stands alone." The public nature of it now. Witnesses, logs, command involvement, turned private defiance into a reckoning, the chain of command activating like a well-oiled mechanism. As night fell, the base quieted under a canopy of stars, generators humming faintly, the occasional patrol dog's bark punctuating the dark. In his bunk, Hargrove stared at the ceiling, the day's events a catalyst. One shove, a dozen eyes, the moral line drawn bolder. Rex's survival, his father's loss, they intertwined now, demanding he prove loyalty beyond mockery. The institution stirred, investigations pending, but in the silence, Hargrove felt the shift toward something larger, a test of integrity that could redefine not just his place, but the squad's unspoken code. The fluorescent lights of the company headquarters buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow across the linoleum floors and the rows of metal desks stacked with personnel files. The air carried the faint, acrid scent of fresh ink from the printer and the underlying mustiness of old reports, a reminder that every infraction here was etched into the permanent record. Private Daniel Hargrove stood at ease in the antechamber, his uniform starched and aligned, but his hands clasped behind his back betrayed a subtle tension in the knuckles. It was 800 hours, 2 days after the range incident, and the summons from Captain Reed had come via runner at dawn. Brief, official. Report for inquiry. Bring your logbook. The door to the inner office creaked open, and Sergeant Vasquez emerged, Rex at her side on a short lead, the dog's nails clicking softly against the tile. The German shepherd's coat gleamed under the lights, but his left hind leg bore the familiar hitch, a quiet testament to endurance as he sat precisely beside her boot. Vasquez's expression was neutral, her cap tucked under her arm, but her eyes met Hargrove's with a nod that spoke volumes, solidarity forged in shared witness. "They're reviewing footage," she said lowly, over the hum of the air unit. "Ellis denies intent. Stick to facts, Private. The chain values truth over sides." Hargrove acknowledged with a sharp incline of his head, feeling the weight of the moment settle like a full rucksack. The investigation had moved swiftly, as they did in units where cohesion was the lifeline. Body cams from the range had captured the boot's arc, the stumble, the alert that followed despite it. Whispers in the barracks had amplified overnight, recruits dissecting the clip during smoke breaks, the air thick with cigarette haze and murmured debates on loyalty versus prank. Hargrove's defense of Rex had painted him as the enforcer now, a role that chafed against his recruit status, pulling him into the public eye he'd sought to avoid. Captain Reed's voice called from within, "Hargrove, enter!" The office was Spartan. Union Jack on the wall, a single window overlooking the quad where the platoon drilled under a watery sun. Reed sat behind his desk, flanked by the company first sergeant, a grizzled veteran with a notebook open to time-stamped entries. No brass from higher echelons yet, but the presence of the JAG liaison, a lieutenant in crisp BDUs, signaled escalation. "At ease," Reed said, gesturing to the chair. "Walk us through the range event. No embellishment." Hargrove sat, spine straight, the wooden seat cool against his fatigues. He recounted it methodically, positions, the sweep, Ellis's shift, the clip to Rex's flank, his own verbal correction. "The dog recovered and alerted, sir, but it compromised the simulation, could mirror a real hazard in the field." His voice remained even, trained to report without inflection, but inside, the narrative intertwined with fragments of his father's declassified logs. A squad disrupted by internal friction, leading to fatal delays. Rex's whine from that day echoed in his mind, not as weakness, but as the cost of unchecked disregard. The JAG lieutenant leaned forward, pen tapping lightly. "And your prior involvement, Private, the pavilion exchange. Witnesses note you confronting Ellis then too." Hargrove met her gaze, the room's clock ticking like a metronome. "Yes, ma'am, same issue, disrespect to a team asset. I corrected it as squad lead would." Reed's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing, the air between them charged with the unspoken. Hargrove's arc from mocker to defender, a transformation under scrutiny that could ripple through evaluations, assignments, even his father's shadowed legacy. Outside, the quad thrummed with routine, boots marching in cadence. The sharp commands of drill instructors cutting through the morning haze. Vasquez waited in the hall, kneeling to adjust Rex's collar, her fingers tracing the worn leather with a gentleness born of years. The dog leaned into her, a low rumble in his throat, as distant gunfire popped from the ranges, training rounds, but a sound that stirred old instincts. She murmured, "Hold steady." Her breath warm against his ear, the bond a silent anchor amid the institutional grind. The inquiry wrapped by 0930, Reed dismissing Hargrove with a curt, "Stand by for findings." Dismissed. As the private exited, Ellis was ushered in, his face pale under the forced composure, shoulders squared but eyes darting. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing the reckoning within those walls. Hargrove joined Vasquez outside, the three of them, man, woman, dog, pausing under the overhang as a light rain began to patter on the tarmac. "How'd it go?" she asked, clipping Rex's lead for the walk back. "Straight facts, Sergeant. They have the tape." He glanced at the dog, who regarded him with steady brown eyes, tail giving a single, measured wag. The gesture landed soft, unearned trust that twisted something in Hargrove's chest. The same loyalty his father had described in letters, the kind that survived blasts and betrayals. Ellis'll face it now, public log probably. Vasquez nodded, starting toward the kennels, the rain slicking the paths and turning gravel to mud underfoot. One act pulls the thread. Unit learns, or it frays. Her words hung as they walked, Rex's paws splashing lightly, the limp softened by the even pace. Hargrove fell in step, unassigned but compelled, the morning's formality giving way to a quieter tension. Recruits from the platoon spotted them en route, conversations halting mid-stride, eyes following the trio like spotters on a patrol. By midday, the findings circulated via company brief in the mess hall. Trays set aside as Reed addressed the assembled ranks over the clatter of silverware. The air smelled of reheated rice and steamed vegetables, a mundane backdrop to the captain's measured tone. Private Ellis, Article 92 violation, failure to obey order or regulation, dereliction impacting unit readiness, 14 days restriction to quarters, plus kennel detail under Sergeant Vasquez. Murmurs rippled, forks pausing, the weight of consequence visible in Ellis's downcast gaze from the back row. Private Hargrove, commendation for intervention, log positive for your file. The hall fell silent, save for the hum of vents, the public nature of it etching lines deeper, careers marked, reputations recalibrated. Hargrove felt the stares, not hostile now, but probing. The shift from pariah to exemplar settling uneasily. His father's mission, the one Rex had mirrored and outlasted, loomed larger. Defending the dog wasn't just principle, but a bridge to that unclaimed honor. Ellis rose after dismissal, tray in hand, brushing past Hargrove with a muttered, "Didn't mean harm," but the words rang hollow against the tape's truth. Afternoon drills resumed on the wet fields, mud sucking at boots as the platoon ran formations, the rain easing to a drizzle that beaded on helmets. Vasquez integrated Rex into a scent demo, the dog working through puddles with unyielding focus. His alerts precise despite the slick ground. Hargrove shadowed without assignment, covering flanks, the routine a balm to the morning's edge. As evening fell, the base lights flickered on, casting reflective pools on the concrete, the scent of wet fur and damp earth mingling with distant chow aromas. In the kennels, Hargrove volunteered for Ellis's first detail. Hosing runs under the handler's watchful eyes, water arcing cold and steady. Rex watched from his enclosure, head tilted, the limp forgotten in repose. Vasquez oversaw from the office doorway, radio static crackling softly. "Reform starts small," she said to Hargrove as he wrung out the hose. "You showed the way." He nodded, the water dripping from his gloves, the act of service a quiet redemption. For Ellis, for himself, for the legacy that bound them all. Night settled with the low growl of generators, patrols circling the perimeter, the rain's patter fading to silence. In his bunk, Hargrove lay still, the day's reckoning a turning point, public eyes on private choices, the chain bending toward justice. Rex's survival, his father's echo. They demanded more now, a defiance that rippled outward, testing the institution's core. Tomorrow would bring Ellis's detail, witnesses to his amends, but the moral arc curved higher. Loyalty's cost, etched in every disciplined step. The morning sun broke through scattered clouds over Fort Bragg, its rays slanting across the quad, where the platoon assembled for the daily muster. The air held a crisp edge, laced with the scent of rain-soaked earth from the night's drizzle and the faint, oily residue from the armory's morning cleanings. Private Daniel Hargrove stood in formation, his boots planted firm on the gravel, uniform still carrying the faint dampness from yesterday's details. The commendation from Captain Reed weighed on him, not as glory, but as a marker, a line drawn in his personnel file that could steer his path forward or snag it on unseen obstacles. Whispers from the ranks had quieted, but eyes lingered, measuring the recruit who'd turned from jester to sentinel. Reveille had come and gone with mechanical precision, the bugle's call pulling the barracks to life at 500. Hargrove had risen early, folding his bunk with ritual care, the coarse sheets snapping taut under his hands. In the latrine, the rush of water from sinks mingled with low conversations, speculation on Ellis's restriction, the kennel duty that now loomed like an extended patrol. Hargrove avoided the chatter, splashing cold water on his face, the chill sharpening his resolve. His father's letters, tucked in a footlocker drawer, spoke of similar reckonings. Squads tested by internal fractures, healed only through enforced accountability. Captain Reed stepped forward at Aero 600, his voice projecting clear over the formation. "Platoon, attention. Today's schedule, standard quals, followed by unit integration with K9 assets. Private Ellis reports to Sergeant Vasquez for detail at 800. No exceptions." The words landed even, procedural, but they stirred a ripple, boots shifting slightly, breaths held in unison. Ellis stood at the rear, chin up, but gaze fixed on the horizon, his uniform impeccable despite the pallor beneath. Hargrove caught Vasquez's profile at the flank, Rex sitting rigidly beside her, the dog's dark eyes scanning the ranks with quiet vigilance, his limp hidden in the formal sit. The platoon dismissed to the ranges, boots crunching gravel in measured cadence, the distant thump of helicopter blades underscoring the march. Hargrove fell in with his squad, rifle slung, the leather strap worn smooth against his shoulder, the range air bit sharper, carrying the metallic tang of spent brass from prior sessions, targets aligned like silent sentries along the firing line. Instructors oversaw quals with clipped commands, sighters on, fire when ready. Hargrove's rounds grouped tight, the recoil a steady pulse. But his mind drifted to the kennels. Ellis's fate there under Vasquez's steady eye, a chance for amends or further fracture. By 800, as the platoon broke for rotation, Hargrove volunteered for oversight on the K9 integration demo, citing his logged commendation. Reed approved with a nod, the captain's clipboard flipping to the next page. Vasquez led the way to the training annex, a fenced compound of low buildings and open runs, the ground soft from recent rain, puddling in low spots. Rex trotted at her heel, paws leaving faint prints, his coat drying to a glossy sheen under the climbing sun. Ellis arrived on time, rucksack exchanged for a mop and bucket, his movements deliberate as he reported, "Private Ellis, sir, reporting for detail." Vasquez acknowledged him coolly, handing over the supplies. Runs first, scrub to regulation, Rex's enclosure last, no shortcuts. The handler's tone brooked no debate, her gloved hand resting on the dog's head, feeling the subtle tension in his frame. Ellis nodded, jaw set, and set to work, hose spraying in a steady arc, water sheeting across the concrete. The scent of wet straw and soap rose, mingling with the earthy undertone of the kennels. Hargrove positioned himself at the perimeter, ostensibly logging procedures, but his presence served as witness, a quiet enforcer of the reform, now in motion. As Ellis worked, the silence stretched, broken only by the splash of water and the occasional bark from adjacent runs. Rex watched from his chain-link pen, head tilted, nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar rhythm. The private paused midway, bucket sloshing, and glanced at the dog. "Didn't mean to trip him," Ellis muttered, more to the ground than anyone, wiping suds from his hands. Vasquez, checking harnesses nearby, didn't turn. Intent or not, it risked the team. Actions echo, Private. Clean it right and maybe you learn why. Hargrove stepped closer, voice low but firm. "Rex pulled a handler through fire you can't imagine. My old man didn't make it on a similar op. Mockery's easy. Respects the grind." The words came unbidden, a bridge from his own past error. The vulnerability raw in the open air. Ellis met his eyes, the hose dripping, forgotten, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. Not apology, but the first crack in defensiveness. "Heard about your dad. Didn't know the dog's story matched." The admission hung small but pivotal as Vasquez called Rex for a brief walk, the dog's limp evident on the uneven path, a living testament. The detail extended into midday, the sun baking the compound until heat shimmered off the fences. Other handlers rotated in, their canines demonstrating alerts, noses to the wind, paws raised on cue, the precision a lesson in trust. Ellis mopped methodically now, sweat beading on his brow, the labor stripping away the bravado. Hargrove assisted without order, hauling water buckets, the strain in his arms a shared burden. Witnesses gathered organically, recruits on break, peering through the gates, the scene etching into unit lore. One private murmured to another, "Hargrove's turning it around. Ellis might stick after this." Lunch came via field rations under the annex awning, MRE pouches tearing open with plastic crinkles, the scent of heated chili cutting the kennel smells. Vasquez fed Rex from a bowl, her fingers scratching behind his ears, the dog's tail thumping softly. Ellis sat apart at first, then joined the circle, passing a water bottle. "That limp, it's from Helmond," he asked Vasquez directly, voice tentative. She nodded, eyes on Rex. "Shrapnel. He dragged Ramirez 200 meters, saved the squad's evac." The handler's restraint let the fact stand alone, no embellishment, but it landed heavy, mirroring Hargrove's unspoken grief. Afternoon shifted to joint exercises, infantry shadowing K9 sweeps in the mock village. Plywood walls, scarred from drills. Ellis, detail paused, integrated under supervision, his movements cautious around Rex. During a breach simulation, the dog alerted first, sitting sharp amid debris, and Ellis covered the angle without hesitation. Boot planted clear, rifle steady. "Clear left," he called, voice integrating into the team's rhythm. Hargrove flanked right, their eyes meeting briefly, a nod exchanged like a silent handoff. Vasquez debriefed post-run. Solid, integration holds when respect does. As evening PT wound down on the quad, stretchers pulling taut under floodlights, the platoon buzzed with the day's undercurrents. Reed pulled Hargrove aside near the barracks, the captain's shadow long across the grass. "Your oversight noted. Ellis's detail. It's working. But watch the ripple. One reform inspires, or it isolates." Hargrove saluted, the words sinking in, the cost of his stand now communal, legacies intertwining. In the mess hall, trays clattered over stew and bread, conversations turning to the kennels. Ellis scrubbed like it mattered. Hargrove showed him how. Night fell with the base's routine hum, generators thrumming, patrol's footsteps echoing on concrete. In the kennels, Ellis finished his shift alone, hosing the final run, Rex watching from afar. The private paused, hand on the gate. "Sorry, boy," he said softly, the words lost to the wind but witnessed by the empty yard. Hargrove, passing on his way to quarters, caught the gesture, a quiet affirmation of change. Vasquez locked up later, Rex at her side. The dog's steady gait a symbol of resilience unbroken. In his bunk, Hargrove lay still, the ceiling beams blurring in the dim light, the day's progress a fragile bridge. His father's mission, Rex's survival. They converged now, demanding he mentor the fracture, the institution leaning toward quiet reform. Ellis's amends, public in labor, sparked potential, loyalty tested, conscience forged. Tomorrow's drills would embed it deeper, the chain of command evolving one disciplined act at a time. If this story already has your respect, hit the like button. It helps the story of Daniel Hargrove reach those who still believe in honor. The days following Ellis's detail blurred into the relentless cadence of Fort Bragg's routine, each reveille a fresh call to embed the lessons of fracture and repair. The air in the barracks carried the perpetual mix of boot wax and faint mildew from the Carolina humidity, a scent that grounded Private Daniel Hargrove as he rose at 500, folding his bunk with the precision of habit now laced with purpose. His commendation had rippled outward. not as fanfare, but as quiet precedent. Recruit conversations shifting from barbs to measured respect. The K9 units no longer footnotes in platoon briefings, but integral threads in the weave of unit trust. Hargrove's file bore the mark, a positive entry that whispered of potential, squad leader material perhaps, or handler track if he pursued it. But the true weight lay in the unspoken, his stand for Rex bridging personal loss to institutional growth. By midweek, the platoon assembled under a sky heavy with impending rain, the quad's gravel slick from overnight mist. Captain Reed's morning address cut through the formation like a well-honed blade. Integration evolves. K9 teams lead today's urban sim. Privates Hargrove and Ellis, Shadow Vasquez. Observe and log. No interference. The words sealed their roles. Witnesses turned participants in the reform's next phase. Ellis stood taller now, his restriction lifting that day, but the kennel shifts had etched lines of humility into his posture, his eyes avoiding the ground less defiantly. Hargrove met his gaze briefly, a nod exchanged, fragile alliance forged in suds and silence. Vasquez and Rex took point at the mock village, the plywood facades weathered and scarred, the air thick with the loamy scent of turned earth from recent digs. Rex's harness clicked secure, his coat damp from the humidity, the limp a subtle counterpoint to his fluid advance. "Scent track first," Vasquez briefed, her voice steady over the low hum of generators powering the simprops. "Infantry covers, alerts dictate movement." Hargrove and Ellis fell in at the flanks, rifles at low ready, boots sinking into the soft perimeter. The exercise unfolded methodically. Rex weaving through alley mock-ups, nose sampling the breeze laced with concealed odorants, his paw raising sharp on the first hit, a simulated cache under a debris pile. Ellis moved with uncharacteristic caution, his sector sweep deliberate, boot placements measured to avoid even the hint of intrusion. When Rex paused mid-track, sniffing a shadowed corner, the dog glanced back once, ears perked before pressing on. "Clear right," Ellis called, voice integrating seamlessly, the earlier nudge a ghost dispelled by repetition. Hargrove mirrored from the left, his logbook tucked in a pouch, noting not just alerts, but the subtle sink. Human steps yielding to canine instinct, the bond a model for squad rhythm. Vasquez's gloved hand tightened on the lead during a tight breach. Rex's body language, tail low, focus locked, guiding the team past a booby-trapped door without falter. Debrief followed under the annex pavilion, folding chairs scraping concrete as the platoon circled. Rain began to patter on the metal roof, a steady drum underscoring Reed's review. 97% detection. Hargrove, Ellis, your logs highlight cohesion gains. Vasquez, Rex's performance sets benchmark. The captain's eyes lingered on the privates, the commendation implicit, reform in action, one exercise at a time. Ellis shifted, wiping rain from his brow, and volunteered, "Sir, the detail showed me the gear side. Handlers maintain more than equipment, it's trust." The admission drew nods, recruits leaning in, the pavilion's damp air carrying the weight of shared evolution. Afternoon calls on the range tested the shift, the sharp crack of rounds echoing under gathering clouds, brass casings warm and slick underfoot. Hargrove qualified clean, but Ellis edged him, groupings tighter, focus honed by the kennel's grind. Post-firing, as weapons cleared with ritual snaps, Ellis approached Hargrove near the berm, the scent of cordite clinging to their fatigues. "That story about your dad and Rex, it stuck. Didn't realize the limp was a survivor's mark." Hargrove paused, cloth midway on his rifle, the vulnerability reciprocal now. "Mine didn't make the evac. Rex did. Honoring that means backing the team, all of it." The exchange was brief, mission-focused, but it sealed mentorship. Hargrove the guide, Ellis the amendee, their dynamic a microcosm of the unit's quiet pivot. Vasquez observed from the handler's post, Rex panting steadily at her side, a bowl of water lapping under her supervision. "They're sinking," she noted to a fellow handler over radio static, the device's faint crackle blending with the rain's intensification. The dog's head tilted toward the privates, sensing the thaw without a sound, his limp forgotten in the routine check of paws for abrasions. That evening, PT ran long under floodlights, the trail muddied, boots splashing in cadence. Hargrove and Ellis ran abreast in the K9 shadow group, breaths measured, the burn in their legs mirroring the internal forge. Loyalty no longer mocked, but embodied. By week's end, the reform crested in a company-wide brief. The mess hall's long tables cleared for the assembly, the air warm with the residue of chow lines, faint traces of gravy and coffee. Reed stood at the podium, projector humming as clips from body cams played. Rex's alerts, interventions, details, a visual ledger of progression. This unit learns from within. Private Hargrove's commendation sparks protocol review. Mandatory K9 respect modules in training cycles. Ellis's detail sets precedent for accountability. Murmurs approved, forks set aside from late snacks, the institution bending, forms updated, briefings expanded, the ripple institutionalizing one dog's honor. Hargrove felt the transformation settle, not as medal but legacy. His father's unclaimed mission echoed in Rex's endurance. Now a squad-wide ethos. Vasquez pulled him aside, post-brief, Rex leaning into her leg. "You turned the tide, Private. Rex thanks you too." The dog's tail thumped once, eyes steady, the silent bond extending. Ellis joined them later in the kennels, volunteering beyond duty, brushing coats, logging meds, the labor a bridge to redemption. As night deepened, the base hummed with generators and distant patrols, rain easing to a mist that beaded on windows. In his bunk, Hargrove lay awake briefly, the ceiling's shadows softening, the cost of integrity paid in full, careers realigned, reputations mended, the system stronger for the stand. Rex's limp, once mocked, now symbolized resilience, a beacon in rigid ranks where duty met conscience head-on. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and justice within the ranks. Thank you for watching the case of a recruit mocked the dog's limp until he learned the K9 survived a mission his own father didn't. See you in the next one.